Hi folks, Glyn here, just to remind you that if you haven't already, make sure you click on the subscribe button on my YouTube channel and also click the bell icon and tick in the notifications checkbox so that you'll never miss any of the live broadcasts. That's just a great and free way of showing you like the channel. Also, over on my website at glyndewis.com, click on the newsletter menu item to join my email group and download your free ebook called How to Develop Your Style. Fill in your email address, first name and family name, and then click on the subscribe button. And finally, add me in and connect over on Instagram by finding me with the username @glyndewis. And there we go. Alrighty folks, thanks very much for tuning in tonight. Those of you who were here last night, my god, you're glutton for punishment. I was just kind of speaking to the folks in the chat room before we started. The reason why I'm doing another YouTube live straight after the one that I did yesterday, the reason for that is that we kind of went through inverse square law. And this morning I've woken up thinking there must be better ways that I can explain it. So I'm going to go through it without talking about f-stops, which is how we measure light, because it gets a little bit confusing. I had a couple of direct messages from people saying, but what if I can't get my light meter to read f22 and all that kind of stuff? So we're going to forget f-stops, we're going to go back to basics, and we're going to get quite technical, but I think I'll be able to explain it to you in a really simple way, the kind of way that goes into my head and that I can understand it. So hopefully I can pass that on to you as well. I'm also going to show you a few more kind of examples, practical examples of how you could then go on and use this in your own photography. All right, so that's that. Now the reason I just want to show you a couple of things so you don't always have to stare at me. The reason I'm kind of going to go through this is because I was at the Societies event in London this past weekend when I was kind of showing people how to do cross lighting, split lighting, and then Rembrandt lighting. And I actually had somebody kind of then come up to me and say, well, how could you use that lighting to photograph a group? Because I have used and I do use that kind of lighting to photograph big groups. So I want to kind of explain the inverse square law as to how we can do that. But before we get into it, I want to kind of explain. I didn't show this last night, but here's a book. This is when we're talking about light and understanding light. It's quite a thick book. This is, for want of a better phrase, this is the Bible of light. And it's called Light, Science and Magic. It's not a cheap book, but it's really, really good. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain, or I'm going to read out rather, what it says inverse square law is. And maybe you'll start to realise, hi Oni, hopefully you'll start to realise, understand why it is people get so confused about this mythical inverse square law. So here is what the book, the Bible, says. The inverse square law says that intensity is inversely proportional to the square of the distance. Thus, a light at any particular distance from the subject will light the subject with an intensity 4 times as bright as the same light twice as far away. Similarly, a light will have 9 times the intensity of the same light moved 3 times as far from the subject. As the intensity of the light falling on the subject varies, so does that of the diffuse reflection. And here endeth the lesson, or not, because when I got that and I read it, I confused myself even more. But now I kind of understand it, so I want to kind of explain it to you. Now, all of that kind of stuff that I just said then, I want to condense that into just one kind of phrase for you to remember. Like I said, we're not going to talk about f-stops. We're just going to talk about the basic principles. Because I think it's great if you can understand the physics and all that kind of technical stuff behind why light does what it does. But ultimately, if you can just understand the idea of what it is, if you can understand kind of like the theory just a little bit so you kind of know what happens, that's enough. All right, you don't need to know necessarily all the physics and all the things about photons and all that kind of just noise. If you understand the idea, it will work. All right, so all I want you to remember, apart from not all that, is this. Let's just bring my screen. I'm going to dive over to my Photoshop screen now, and I want you to just look at this. So all I'm going to say is this. Every time you double the distance from the light, you lose 75% of it. Okay? So every time you double the distance from the light, you lose 75% of the power of that light. So it's not quite a stop, it's a little bit over. So 75%, all right? But don't try and confuse it any more than that. So just think, you lose 3/4 of the power coming out of that light every time you double the distance. So what does that mean in real practical terms, all right? Let's have a look at this. Now, let's just say that you are in this big white room, and on one side of the room, you put up a light. Okay, you could put a modifier on it, it doesn't really matter. So you put up a light. You could actually just have a torch on there. It doesn't matter. This is just about light, all right? So we have this light on the far left-hand corner, or left-hand side. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to put my back. I'm now in this room, and I'm going to put my back against that light, and I'm going to step forward a distance. I'll probably step forward maybe 1 pace. Now, it doesn't really matter if we're talking stepping forward a pace, or an inch, or a centimetre, or a metre, or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to step forward, and I just happen to step forward to where you can see that red marker. All right, and just for the ease of explanation, let's just say that that is point A, and I've stepped forward 1 pace. So we'll call it point A, and the black number 1 means just that. I've stepped forward 1 pace. Now, I don't know really what the power of that light is, but let's just say at this point now, I take a meter reading and I look at it and I make a note of it. All right, doesn't matter what it is for this purpose, but I just take a meter reading at that point. Now, remembering what I said, every time you double the distance from the light, you lose 75%. So what does that mean then? Well, if I now put my back against that light again, but this time I step forward 2 paces. So I've doubled the distance. So we'll call that point B. Point A was 1 pace. Point B rather was 2 paces. But what has happened? Well, looking at what I said before, every time you double the distance, you lose 75%. What this basically means is this. The point A, I got a reading on my light meter. If I then took a light meter reading at point B, which is double the distance, it would be 75% less. Just in that very small distance. That could be a centimetre. It could be a metre. It could be anything. But just in that very small distance, I've already lost 75% of the light coming out of that actual light source. Let's take it a step further. Now, let's say I now step forward 4 paces. So I've doubled the distance again. First time I was 1 pace, then I went to 2, now I'm 4 paces. I take a meter reading, and now the distance between B and C has doubled. B was 2 paces, C is 4 paces, so I've doubled that distance. So that also means that between B and C, I've lost 75% of the light. So whatever the meter reading I was had at point B, I've lost 75% again. Let's go further. I now go forward 8 paces, and we'll call that point D. And again, going by what we've already said, when every time you double the distance, you lose 75%. Now when we look at it, point C was 4 paces. I've now doubled the distance and I've gone to 8 paces. So the distance, or the difference now between point C and point D has also lost 75%. But as this goes on, look at what is happening here. Look at the difference between A and B and C and D. The gap between A and B is really small. I've still lost 75% of the light. But the distance between C and D is bigger. But I've still only lost 75% of the light. Now, I've just seen a comment in there. Anybody else having difficulty? What's the problem, guys? Is it buffering or is it okay? Hopefully it'll be okay. All right, so let's just go another step further. I'm going to go to rather than 8 paces, I'm going to jump forward to 16 paces, even further. So at point D, I was 8. At point E, I'm now 16. And yet again, I lose only 75%, but this time on a much bigger distance. So now we call this light fall off. So when we look between A and B, very short, that light has dropped 75% incredibly fast. The light fall has been dramatically fast. Okay, so the closer we are to that light drops off and loses 75% incredibly quick. But now when we move further away from it, let's say we stand at point D and then we move over to point E, look at this difference there. It's a much bigger gap between D and E when we're still only losing 75%. So the fall off of light between D and E is much more gradual, much more gentle, much more controlled. So how can we use this in practical terms? Well, we've already talked about how would you photograph a group, and this picture here is a perfect example. This is a group that I photographed, group of about 12 or 13 people I think there are in there. And for me to photograph them, you think, well, I only used one light source, but where would I place the light source in relation to the people? Let's dive back into the little diagram here. Well, if I was going to photograph a large group of people, this is where I would put them. On this particular diagram here, I would probably put them there, because there is a much bigger distance between 2 points when we lose 75% of light. So the difference from the side of the group on the left to the person on the far right, that's going to be manageable. It's probably going to be around about half a stop or so, maybe 1 stop, but that's acceptable. However, if I did this, which is what I would do when I first started out doing this kind of stuff and trying to understand light, I would do this. I would think, well, I've got a nice big light. Well, surely if I want to light all these people, I need them to be nice and close to the light. So I would maybe drag them across and put them here. But we know now, the closer you are to the light, the much more faster and quicker that light just drops off. So look, we've got from point A to point B, the first 2 people, the light has already disappeared by 75%. Now look over here, we've got 75% difference in light from A to B, another 75% difference from B to C, and then the group actually goes into this group here between C and D. So the difference in light from the person on the far left to the person on the far right is going to be massive. It could even be something like 2 stops of light difference. The person on the left could be nice and bright. The person on the right could be almost in darkness. So the best thing to do is to have your light a far distance away so that there is a much bigger area where the light drops off, much more gradual between point D and point E, where we lose 75%. Put the group in there. You're going to get a much more acceptable spread of light from the person on the left to the person on the right. And obviously this is all going to be very much dependent on the size of the workspace that you've got. The group that we had there, that were the group of 12 or 13 people, there is no way we could have done that in a normal sized studio because there were so many people. We needed the light a long, long way away to give us a big enough gap either side of them where the light was falling off, and we were only losing 75% roughly from the left hand side to the right hand side. All right, so that's that there. Now it can get a little confusing even talking about this, and when I was at the event in London and I was speaking to a woman, she was still this one particular woman pulled me aside and said, I think I get it, but I'm kind of just a little bit needed to sort of, there's one extra little bit I need to know. So I said, okay, forget what I've just told you, but let's try and do it in a different way. And this is exactly how I learnt it. Imagine that I am the light source, okay? And you are stood right next to me, and we are stood really, really close together. Now, because you're really close together, I've got my hands like this, and I want to give you a hug. But because you're so close, I can't get my arms, let's move back a bit, I can't get my arms out to go round you. So what would I need to do to give you a hug? Well, to get my arms free, I'm going to step back away from you to free my arms up so that I can then get my arms around you. Does that make sense? So if I'm too close, I can't get hold of you. If I step back, that lets me spread my arms much further so I can grab around you. So in this kind of example here, think of the light having arms. Okay, if the people are too close, the light's not able to spread across all of them. But if you move them away from it, the light can get its arms out, give them a stretch, and then stretch them right out and cover everybody in that particular group. That sounds kind of crazy, I know, but bear with me. Hopefully, for some of you, that might be all you needed to know. So that's that. Right. Let me just put... in fact, let's have a look at another couple of examples here, because I have got some examples that kind of lead on from this. So let's have a look. Let's just open up another couple of examples. So we've got... let's have a look here. We'll go, first of all, let's have a look at this one. So we've talked about how, let's just get rid of that graph line just there. We've talked about how the closer you are to the closer you are to the light source, the faster the light drops away and disappears. Now, one way that a person I know uses this is when they're photographing cars. If you've heard of a superb photographer called Tim Wallace, he photographs high-end automobiles like Aston Martin and Jaguar, beautiful, beautiful cars. And when he's photographing the detail, the real close-up detail, maybe it could be the wing of the car, maybe it be the badge on the back of the bumper, something like that. He uses inverse square law so that you don't get distracted by anything else, and the only thing you see is the badge. So how does he do that? Well, let's just move this aside just here. Well, what Tim does is this, and I'm really simplifying what Tim does is this. He wouldn't have the car all the way back here when he's trying to photograph the front wing and the front wheel, because what that would do is the light would then just get its arms. Remember before, the light, when it's far away, it can get its arms out and really stretch. So what's going to happen there is it would just stretch and cover all of the car like this, which is not what Tim wants. What Tim wants to do is this, so that you only limit the amount of light on the car. He brings the light really close to the car like this. So then when he actually lights it, thinking of inverse square law, the closer we are, the light falls off much, much quicker. So now when he lights it, the light will go off and it'll probably just come to around about here. And then eventually it'll start to drop off. And because he uses a technique similar to what I call the invisible black background, the only area you're going to see lit is on that bumper. Then eventually we're going to lose 75% of the light, and then another 75%. And eventually the rest of the car is going to go to darkness. And you'll only see the bumper, the wheel, the logo, and all that kind of stuff. All right. So that's how Tim would use it. Now let's have a look what else we've got here. So have a look, file, open, and we've got light car, and we've got the studio. So here's another example here. So you're with me so far? Let's have a quick slurp of water. So now here's another great way you can use it. Let's just get on my layer comps. Again, thinking that, like we said, every time you double the distance from the light source, you lose 75% of the light. So now let's look at this scenario now. Let's say that this is your studio. This is you at the camera. You've got a nice white background, a paper roll with two light stands, which you can see over on the far right hand side. You've got a person stood right in front of that white background, and you've got a light on them. Now, you'll take a nice meter reading, they'll be nicely exposed, and they're right up close against that background. So that background really pretty much is going to be the same exposure of the person. It's going to be quite a nice bright background. Now, ideally, when you're doing the photo shoot, you would love to vary the look of the actual shoot. Imagine if you could maybe make your white paper background go a shade of grey. Maybe you could even make that white paper background go black. Well, that's really simple. We've only got to do now what we've already talked about. So let's have a look. At the moment, you can see that the light is that distance there away from the background. Okay, so now then, let's double the distance that that light is. I'm going to keep the person and the light in the same distance from each other because that's nice and perfectly exposed person, but we're doubling the distance away from the background. So because we've done that, we've doubled the distance now that the light is from that white background, so we've lost 75% of the light. So that background now is only 25% as bright as what it had been, because we've just lost 75% by moving the light twice the distance away. Making sense? So now your background won't be white, it's going to be a shade of grey. So you could take it a step further. You've done some great headshots, you're varying the looks now, but let's look at this. We've now moved it double the distance. Let's double that distance again. But again, we're going to keep the person the same distance from the light, because at that distance they're perfectly exposed. We're just going to move everybody and the light away from that background again, doubling the distance. So now we've lost 75% again. So now the background has gone from a grey to pretty much going black. You might need to move just a little bit more away from it, but can you see now, by having this kind of principle just here, by moving away, doubling the distance, by losing 75%, we can make a white background go grey and eventually go black. It is an incredibly handy thing that you can have at your disposal here. I've done this, I've got videos where I've shown how I do my invisible black background. And a perfect example of how I used to use this. Let me just dive back so you've got me a bit bigger on the screen. A perfect example of how I used to use this. I used to have in my car a little kit, a little think tank bag. It was only about this kind of size. And in there I had quite a low-end kind of camera, a DSLR, a little really cheap Canon. And I had a speed light and a little modifier by, what they're called now, they're called Rogue Flash Bender. So I would always have that in the car for the times when there was a chance for taking a portrait. And I was always doing those invisible black background portraits. If you don't know that technique, I'll put it in the link in the description part, but also at the end, there'll be like a little thumbnail, you can click on that video. But what I would do is, if I was in a cafe, I would see someone and think, oh, they'd be great for a portrait. I'd go and speak to them and say, look, can I take your portrait? I'd show them a few examples just so they kind of knew that I wasn't a weirdo. But I'd say, can I take your portrait? So I'd get my camera, I'd have my speed light, I'd have the little modifier on it. But when I was taking their picture, that light, that little modifier there, would be really close into their face, just out of camera view. Now, because it's in very, very close, what happens? The light drops off really quickly. So what I would find is, in the middle of the day in a cafe, I would have their face perfectly exposed, but then going further back, the light would drop off extremely quickly, so then the background would go completely black. So in this nice big busy cafe, I've ended up getting a very low-key portrait where all you can see is their face and the top of their shoulders and so on. You can't see anybody behind because I'm using my invisible black background technique. But the main thing is I'm using inverse square law. I'm putting that light in nice and close so that the actual fall off of the light is dramatic and really, really quick. If I'd had the light further away, what would happen? We'd have a much bigger distance there where the light would be falling off, so it'd be much more gradual. But I wanted to lose the background. So that's that. That's one of the kind of things, that the ways that I want to try and explain there. And there was a couple of other little things that I needed to kind of let you know, which I kind of answered in the comments last night, but is really, really important. Now, I might have just seen it in some of the kind of comments there, but one thing you have to remember about it is this. We're talking about moving the light further away. Let's say you're taking a portrait and you like to have beautiful soft light. Obviously, if you're now moving the light away from the subject because you're doing inverse square law, the further away that light source is going, the harder it's going to get. Because we know that a nice big close-in light source is nice and soft. As the light gets smaller, which it kind of is when you put it further away, the light's going to get harder. So you would in fact need a bigger modifier to compensate for the distance that you're taking it away. Now, if I just dive back into here, and again, just kind of mention this group here. Now, with this kind of group, if you were going to photograph a large group and you didn't have a really big modifier that you could have some distance away, one easy solution for that could be, let's just dive back again. One really simple solution for that could be is you go down to the local home supplies, go and get yourself a cheap a white translucent shower curtain. Nice big shower curtain. So you could then put that between two light stands and put that to the side, way to the side, and put your light on the other side of it. So then when you take the picture, the light goes off, it hits that translucent shower curtain and becomes an enormous modifier. That light then goes onto your subjects, you've placed them exactly where they need to be, but because your light source has been made to be big, because it's hitting the shower curtain, you're still going to get a really nice soft light onto your subjects. So how does that sound? I'm hoping that's kind of cleared it up. It can be a nightmare, but I'm really hoping that just this simple explanation, just to remember, let's go back to where it says here, that every time you double the distance from the light source, you lose 75%. You don't even need to be in a studio to see this. Get your phones out, turn on the torch, and put it 30 centimeters away from a wall, and you'll see the light on the wall. Then move it 60 centimeters away and look at the difference in the amount of light hitting it. Then move it 120 centimeters away and look what's happened. Every time you double it away from the wall, you're losing 75% of the brightness hitting that wall just there. All right, so it's not just for studio flashes, it's for any kind of flash as well. So I'm going to, how big was your softbox? Edward, the softbox I used, now I know I did say that I kind of used one modifier on that particular group. I had a 175 centimeter Octa, the Rotalux 175 softbox from Elinchrom. Now that was giving me a nice light. What I did also do was, because I wanted the light source to be bigger, so I had a softer kind of look on the subjects, I put my 135 centimeter right next to it. And both of the lights were in the same channel and the same group. So what we had there, although those two light sources, I've put them together, when it goes off, it's like having one light source, but because I put them two together, it's kind of bigger. I didn't have a shower curtain, but even that worked, okay? Just combining modifiers, grouping them together, and away you go. Stuart Wood, you've just done it, you legend. Thank you very much. He's just done one of these super chat things and put some money in. Very kind of you, mate. Very kind of you. All right, so hopefully that's it. I'm going to stick around and have a look in the chat room to make sure that if there's any kind of questions. Oh, yeah, another little thing as well. What I've told you there, it can vary just a little bit if you start to focus the light. So let's say you put a snoot on and all that kind of stuff. Because inverse square law is talking about photons and the way they disperse. But if you're focusing that light, that will change it a little bit. But don't worry about that. Just remember, every time you double the distance, you lose 75%. Keep it like that. Keep it simple. That is all I do. You don't need to know the technical ins and outs of all the photons and all that kind of stuff. Just understand the principle that I've gone through now, and you will have a blast. You'll be able to create all kinds of pictures in areas that you wouldn't have been able to do before, like I did in the coffee shop, because you understand how light falls off the closer you are to the light. Now listen, that's pretty much enough of my voice. I did want to make this a fairly quick one, so we've been going for half an hour there. I will stick around. I'll look in the chat room. I'll edit the video afterwards and just remove the countdown so that people don't get confused and think they have to sit through 5 minutes of countdown as well. But that's it, pretty much. Folks, if you could let other people know about the channel, I would absolutely love you for it. Oh yeah, as well, as I mentioned this yesterday, a couple of little things to mention. In fact, let me just play this, and I've got a couple of things to mention, and then I will get off your face because I want to go and watch. No, I actually want to go and have a fish finger sandwich. So let me just play this little video. Those of you who were on last night, you'd have seen this. It's a bit of an outtake when we tried to record a video to show inverse square law. 1, 2, 3. Hi folks, Glenn here. Just thought I'd put together a quick video following on one. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah.
Take 56.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Hi folks, Glenn here. I thought I'd just put together another short video following on from one that I posted a couple of weeks back when I talked about that Rembrandt style of lighting where we have a light to the side and to the front. Where, Brian, what are you laughing at? See, that was Brian. And you.
No, it was Brian.
I'm working with amateurs. Amateurs, loads of them behind. All right, you got to laugh. You got to laugh. Okay, so the thing that I mentioned to folks last night, if you weren't there, then obviously this will be the first time you've heard this. When I was at the event in London, a woman approached me about this particular organisation here and asked if I would mention it. Now, this is quite hard-hitting, emotive, and emotional kind of photography. And when I mention this here, I'm only speaking to those of you who are in the UK. So if you're not in the UK, you may have something similar to this where you are, wherever you are in the world. But primarily, I'm just going to kind of mention the thing about for the UK folks. This is an organisation called Remember My Baby. And like I said, this is pretty damn hard-hitting stuff, but incredibly important. The web address, I'll try and put that up there for you, is remembermybaby.org.uk. And I'll just read out a little bit of what it says on the back here, because this may be something that you'd like to maybe get involved with. He said, Remember My Baby has been created so that bereaved parents across the UK have easy access to professional portraiture free of charge and at short notice to capture unique memories of their babies who die before, during or shortly after birth. Incredibly powerful, but I think if somebody's kind of experienced that kind of thing, if you could help them out and take pictures like that, well, it's probably beyond words trying to explain how that would be for them. So it's incredibly emotive. I would find that incredibly hard, but I think when I think about how the parents would receive it, it would be something that I would do. So I'm certainly going to be looking at doing something for that. But I'll leave a link to that in the description part of the video. And the last thing before I disappear is let's just dive back down to my screen and let's just bring up this just here. This is something that I put together. It's a tip sheet where I explain how you can actually make sure that when you're getting your images printed, either at a lab or home on your printer, that what you get in your hands is what you see on screen, because I wasted so much money trying to get that right. So I put a little tip sheet together taking you through a process called soft proofing. That is what will sort you out. And the link that you need to do that is glyndewis.com/printing/. All right, so let's just dive out of there and so you can see me for one last time. So there you go. It is glyndewis.com/printing/. Hey, no expense spared in here. But folks, that's it for tonight. There won't be one tomorrow night. Just wanted to clarify a few things. Thank you so much for coming along. Brian, my mate Brian Jukes is in the chat room. Massive thanks to you. Stuart and who's that there? Stuart and Martin Craig. You guys are awesome. They've done this super chat thing. It just blows me away, that does. If you don't know what I mean, have a look in the chat room. But folks, thanks very much. I'll be back next week with something else. Probably photography, probably lighting, maybe even Photoshop related. But have a fantastic week, whatever you're up to. I shall now disappear and I'll see you next time.